Welcome back to another episode of the CSTA podcast. My name is Jared O'Leary. In this week's episode, I'm interviewing Jackie Corricelli. In our discussion, we talk about some advice for both novice and veteran CS educators. Jackie has a ton of excellent tips for everybody, as she is an award-winning educator, multiple awards actually. We also discuss a really interesting idea of the potential for collaboration between industry and educators, so make sure you listen to that section, as well as some design tips for more inclusive CS education, and the potential for volunteering for various CS organizations like the Computer Science Teachers Association, which Jackie and I are both on different state chapter boards. Those are just some of the main topics, however, there are plenty more things that we discussed throughout this episode. As always, the show notes can be found in the app that you're listening to this on by clicking on the link or by visiting jaredoleary.com. And there are a ton of links in the show notes. So for example, at the beginning, Jackie mentions a bunch of different ciphers that kids are using in a cryptography class. And so I link to all of those different ciphers so you can learn more about each one of them. And with all that being said, we're now going to start with an introduction by Jackie.
Hi, I'm Jackie Corricelli. It's wonderful to virtually meet all of you. I'm currently a teacher at Conard High School in West Hartford, Connecticut. I teach AP Computer Science Principles and a brand new course called Cryptography and Cybersecurity that we designed from scratch. Also, I'm a member of the Computer Science Advisory Board for the State Department of Education. That's a voluntary group. I'm the vice president for the Connecticut Computer Science Teachers Association, and I'm constantly working on all kinds of other projects to just improve equity and access to computer science for all students. An example of that that's going on this year is I'm an Equity Fellow for the Computer Science Teachers Association, and that'll be until July 2020.
The cryptography part really captured my attention. What's an example of a project that kids would work on in that class?
Yeah, so they range. The big upcoming project at the end of the current unit is students are picking a classical cryptographic algorithm that mattered to them. For example, I would choose Mary Queen of Scots cipher, which was a nomenclature cipher. They could choose Louis XIV. I know a couple students mentioned Civil War encryption algorithms. Then they would create a computational artifact similar in language to the APCS Principles exam, where they'd use a computational tool to tell a story about that algorithm and teach the audience about it. So it can be fairly unplugged, meaning not necessarily centered on programming, using the computer as a tool. The projects could also be really focused on programming. For the main part of the course, we're using Python as the programming language. And so throughout the course, students are encrypting using the encryption algorithms to both encrypt and decrypt, and also to hack different ciphers. So starting with the Caesar cipher, and then the affine and simple, and I may be mispronouncing affine, but the affine and simple substitution cipher, the Vigennet, right up through public key encryption.
Do you happen to have a resource that you could point to for people who want to learn more about cryptography and whatnot?
Cracking Codes with Python. It's a book by Al Swigart, was the main inspiration for this course. It's been just a wonderful reference for me. I would kind of cite that book. That's a really great starting place if you're interested.
Awesome. I'll link to that in the show notes. Can you tell me the story of how you got into computer science education?
Oh, totally. Yeah. So I didn't take a computer science course, or at least a true computer science course, in high school or in college. When I graduated from the University of Connecticut, I wasn't even quite sure what computer science was. I knew that programming was really interesting to me, but I'm not sure that I knew the breadth of computer science. I'm certain I didn't. I was hired to work at Raytheon, and it was a funny story. I was at a career fair, and there was a person who came. I happened to walk by the Raytheon booth and said, "Hey, how would you like to know how a fax machine works?" And I said, "That sounds cool." And I started asked a few more questions than that. That was sort of the start of an interview, and I ended up accepting the job there. I worked there for 3 years as a systems engineer. Started as software and transitioned to systems. I used C++. I learned some object-oriented programming. My first job was working networking. So I was sitting at a bunch of circuit boards, sort of stacked, simulating a Navy ship on one side of a communication, and then a Navy ship on another side of a communication. And we were sending signals from one Navy ship to the other and seeing if those signals were received correctly or not. So that was my first job. Everything was in hex. I had never heard of hexadecimal digits. And all of the programming was done in C++. And so on the job training with engineers who were just kind enough to be able to help me to be able to learn. Kind of fast forward from that, 3 years later, I had quite a lot of object-oriented design under my belt. I had played a bit with MATLAB and played a bit with a bunch of other programming languages too. And I started volunteering some time working at the Framingham YMCA in Massachusetts. And there was a girl, her name was Christy. She was in elementary school, and she was learning about fractions. And I was helping her. I was a mathematician, and I was helping her, sort of sitting with her to do her mathematics, and her confidence was so low. And what I was really sitting with her and helping her to do was to see, no, this stuff is totally attainable. It's totally doable. Here are some cool uses for it. Here are some reasons why you might want to learn it. And I was talking to her about frequencies and waveforms, and kind of connecting how the reciprocal of the frequency is the amplitude, the height of the wave, and starting to talk a little bit more about how you can do projects with that and things like that. So that project-based instruction, that's sort of sitting with her and learning while doing, I sort of simulated what I was experiencing as an engineer for her. And it turns out it worked really good for her. And I guess I got hooked. That's how I guess circle back now. That's my favorite thing to do as a teacher, is to sit with students and to help them to be able to feel what I felt when engineers were kind to me.
And that one-on-one apprenticeship style model can be very effective.
Yes.
I'm curious. So I only took 2 classes formally, one in high school and one during grad school that related to computer science. Outside of that, it was all informal learning. I imagine a lot of other educators who are new to CS education are trying to figure out, how do I learn how to program, especially something like C++, which is like a nightmare of syntax compared to some other languages. What would you recommend in terms of advice for how to learn if a teacher does not have access to an engineer who's kind enough to sit down and teach them?
That's a really great question. I would start by going to some trainings. There's some really great trainings that are out there for AP Computer Science A and AP Computer Science Principles. And then also the other computer science courses that are out there too in terms of cryptography and cybersecurity. I would recommend Gen Cyber. It was excellent training for me. In terms of the APs, I think a really good idea to start with a AP consultant course. So there's week-long courses all over the country. That's a really great place to start. But keep in mind that's going to be focused on, the AP exam. Yes, there's pedagogy in there too. You'd also want to sort of beef up by, I think really to this day, every summer, I still attend some sort of training. So just never, ever stop learning. And also I'm hoping that this gets released in time, that it would still be true, but Coursera offers a ton of courses. Right now they're free, given the extra downtime, I guess, that people are expected to have, although I'm not finding I have that downtime. But I would really recommend checking out some of those courses, kind of depending on how you choose to learn and how much you have to stay at home. Not everybody can travel to training. Those Coursera courses can really help to scratch that itch too. And then, there's a ton of resources online. There's a website called Coding That. There's another website called Replit, and they come with a ton of supports that would help you to be able to learn. When it comes to the elementary or middle school programming, there's really great resources like your resource, Jared, on Scratch, a boot up, right? And then there's a ton of other resources that are in terms of Scratch, like scratch.mit.edu would link you to a ton of great resources. And again, to circle back to the AP Computer Science Principles course, if Scratch is your thing, Beauty and Joy of Computing does use that. But then there's a ton of other curricula. And I wish I had more time over the summer. I think I'd probably go to one of the AP Computer Science Principles trainings every summer. There's so many really good endorsed providers now for that course. I think there's a lot of really great resources out there.
Yeah.
The problem is time.
Yeah. Yeah, I personally learned from several different approaches that you mentioned. So it wasn't just like going to one and, okay, now I know everything I need to know. It's just continuous learning, whether it be on YouTube or an online course or a physical in-person course, although there's probably not a lot of those going on at the moment, all things considered. Can you tell me a story about your experiences in education that impacts you today?
Actually, the story of impact that matters the most to me is the one where I know that student was successful because somehow they grew more confident as they were with me. And I got to see that confidence. And then I got to see what happened when they left and they were able to be successful elsewhere. I'm going to tell a story about a student. I'm not going to mention her name, but when I first met her, she was a sophomore in an honors pre-calculus course. I'm certain were she to listen, she would know who she is. When I was brand new to the course or to the school system, so I was nervous too. And she didn't expect me to be there. She expected her other teacher to be there. So I'm sure she was nervous as well. I asked them to each share like a fun fact about themselves before we move forward and kind of just start the year off, right? And she was so nervous to say something that she really burst out into tears. Well, I felt terrible, so I didn't, of course, press her to keep going. I said, geez, I want to get to know her more and I want to try to do what I can to help. And so kind of fast forward, her senior year was the first year that I offered AP Computer Science A. And that was the only computer science course that she could take. And she and I by then had a good enough relationship that I got her to take the course. Now, fast forward after she left AP Computer Science A, not only was she certain she wanted to be a problem solver, she wanted to study computer science. She went on and went to a great university to study computer science. They did well by her, and she's now working at Google. And she's in charge of working on the YouTube side of Google, where she's keeping children safe. So looking for people with bad intentions, putting things in YouTube videos that shouldn't be there, and keeping children away from being able to see them. And her heart was always so great. She was always just this amazing person. And I just think it's really cool that if I can help a student to see how amazing they are and give them skills so that they can show that to the world, that is just the best thing. And I love hearing from her. Still to this day, I'll hear from her. And each time I talk to her, she sounds more confident, more resilient, more skilled. Oh my gosh, the skills that she's got is amazing. And I think that's my favorite thing. And she's not the only one, but she was by far the most pronounced in terms of confidence that I saw grow, probably in just raw skill, raw ability. Man, she's just a problem solver by nature. It was just really neat to help her hone those skills and then to see her do something with them, do something great.
And thrive with it sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice seeing kids, how they kind of develop over time, and then what they do when they're outside of school and like beyond their education outside of whatever classes you're doing. That's one of my favorite parts about, like, the longer I've been in education, the more I see students as they continue to grow and whatnot, and just like seeing them be successful in life and remembering where they started and like how they got there and whatnot. It's a fun journey. So if you were to go to a brand new school and you're asked to design like a brand new CS program in terms of like the classes, and what would you consider for the design of that kind of a program in terms of like how you would facilitate it and like what kind of things students would engage in?
The most important thing is to consider where you want your students to end up. And I'm an analytic person by design. I really like the idea of starting where you want to end up and using a structure that you trust. The Computer Science Teachers Association has developed a ton of outstanding standards that are vertically aligned K through 12. Start there. And the framework is excellent. So it actually breaks it down by grade level, what it is that you're hoping that students would be able to achieve at each grade. And it's multiple streams. So there's some stuff about networking, there's some stuff about keeping students safe online, all that K through 12. So start there. I would also really be careful about the teachers that you recruit to be able to teach these courses. It's really important that they understand that they have to have an ongoing commitment to learning, and they have to have an ongoing commitment to equity. They have to be very aware of the fact that not everybody is given an opportunity to play with a robot when they're celebrating their birthdays or whatever holidays matter to their family. In fact, it's a very narrow population of people that are given those opportunities. And as a result, that very narrow population sometimes presents to have more skills than a population that wouldn't be given access to those tools. Kind of the second piece to that is those students, although they may appear more confident, they may be able to play with the tools, but that doesn't necessarily even mean that they understand what they're playing with.
Yeah.
And so, again, that goes back to teacher training and being really purposeful who you're deciding to pick. They can't be fooled by bells and whistles or sort of fooled into thinking that this is a course where the students just simply learn a skill. You'd want to avoid naming a course after a programming skill and instead try to name the course after a programming topic or concept.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, I would avoid, if you can, naming a course robotics, and instead consider calling it by the grade level, computer science, grade, whatever, and really just try to hit those skills that are in the standards for that grade level. Now, all that aside, when you do that, not every school, grade 12 for one school might be grade 10 for another school. So look at those standards and look at where they end up. And if that's true, then if your grade 12 student might actually be a grade 10 student, then consider looking to colleges for those more advanced coursework. So for example, if AP Computer Science A is not going to be a high enough bar for the population of students, then consider, full stack programming or some of the more, so consider how you're going to beef those things up too. Right? So then once you start with that top level down, then from there, decide who's going to teach it and really get that team of teachers together and help them to be symbols of light, symbols of inspiration in the school to hopefully spread it and integrate it as much as possible. Computer science does not have to be a one-off course. Like could never imagine teaching a science course without mathematics. I could never imagine teaching mathematics without some reading. I think the same is true with computer science. And the idea that there's a ton of teachers that are doing a great job integrating computer science using code.org materials, et cetera. Keep that going, but now make it purposeful and connect it to curriculum too. And then the final thing I would really recommend that districts do is look into something called script training. Mm-hmm. Script training is just outstanding. I just attended as a facilitator in Denton, Texas in January. We took a district team down there, and now we're working as a district to be able to implement some of the things that we learned. It is not a one-stop solution. It's a beginning of your district's journey. By the time you leave, you end up with a tentative 3-month, 6-month, and 9-month plan for your district to help you to be able to move forward. So again, it's kind of first stop. If you don't have enough time or, to be able to do all the things I said, first stop is those K through 12 standards and frameworks. Second stop, be real careful about teachers and who you're hiring or looking for to be able to do this. Encourage teachers to kind of integrate, encourage them to experiment, and remember equity. Remember that not every student has had access to these resources, and be mindful of that. Might be really intimidating for some students and frankly some teachers, and that's okay. So kind of be kind and let those teachers be inspiration to try to spread this all over your district and your schools. And your kids will thank you, and your parents will thank you.
Yeah, multiple other guests have also recommended scripts, and a couple of my coworkers are scripts facilitators, so they really enjoy the process. I've heard many good things about it, but I haven't participated in it. So one of the things that you talked about earlier was related to advice to new CS educators, like how to learn and whatnot. But I'm wondering what recommendations you might give to a veteran CS educator who's been doing this for a while and has like gone to all of the workshops and whatnot. I'm like, cool, I have a firm understanding, but what next? How can I continue to improve what I'm doing?
Coursera is really nice for that. I would still suggest back to Coursera. I'm having really great results playing a bit with some of the more advanced Coursera courses. They're some of the best universities across the country, taught by some of the best teachers. It's a really great reference. I'd also recommend some businesses allow teachers to co-op over the summer. Over the summer, if you've got free time, again, I know that that's a tough thing, but consider interning essentially, or volunteering your time, or certainly working for payment. Remember, as teachers teaching Java, we have a skill set that might be quite marketable if we were to, I'm not suggesting that this is what we should do permanently, but I think some businesses might be really interested in hiring us, even if it's temporarily. And imagine what you'd learn using industry practices and also industry equivalent tools. You'll come back to the classroom like we did after student teaching, going, oh, wow, I understand so much more. Now the classroom moves so much slower for me because I'm wiser, So I think that's probably the next step for a lot of us, is to be able to get that industry equivalent, some actual agile training, maybe even attending boot camps. I know that those are kind of sprouting up all over the country to allow people to be able to get training that want to transition into software. We'd have to be honest and say this is to help our students, but that would be really helpful. And then the other side of that is the Computer Science Teachers Association. If you were to become a member, and that would be for all teachers, not just the teachers that are more advanced, but also beginning teachers, you would find comrades or friends in other districts that maybe are doing things different from what you're doing, and you'd be able to learn from them. And in addition, you'd have a chance to give back a little bit. Someone helped you along the way. That's a really nice thing about the Computer Science Teachers Association, is it gives you an opportunity to give back a bit and to be able to help other people. And helping others, as you know, is a great way to learn.
Right. Yeah. And especially if you're a veteran educator, if you can run for a board position on your local chapter, I highly recommend that. So we're both on boards in our own states, and I really enjoy my experience with it. And I imagine the same for you.
I agree. And then the final extension of that too, or an additional extension, is the AP readings. If you're an AP teacher, consider participating in AP Computer Science Principles or AP Computer Science A. We're always looking for readers. I've been a table leader for a couple years now. I was going to be a question leader this year, but everything is changing a bit with the reading, So yeah, the AP program is excellent. They have wonderful training, and becoming a reader is just an excellent way to learn, again, for the same networking benefits, but also just, I think there's something really special about getting yourself onto rubric and then learning from whatever the biases you might be coming into that problem with. And then once you're on rubric, hitting a rhythm and knowing that you're reading all students kind of fairly and equitably, it's really excellent training.
Yeah, I think that's great advice for AP. And I really liked your earlier suggestion of kind of getting some industry experience, knowing where kids are going to go if you are going to be preparing kids for a career in computer science. Like, that's invaluable. It's a completely different thing to understand just the content area versus the content area in a context in which you actually use it in an industry setting.
And I really hope industries are listening too, because we definitely need those opportunities, even if it's 2 to 3 weeks. Can you imagine what a difference it would make for teachers or, internships? There's businesses all around us where we're working, and, we can work from home too. It would be amazing for businesses to kind of see that as an opportunity. And then, lo and behold, those students will see that, hey, they're teachers working for this business. Well, that says something really powerful about that business that hopefully will open a portal for not just the teachers, but also the students to be able to contribute sooner, have internships sooner. I'd love to have more back and forth between local businesses and the education field so that we can support and help each other and have a more qualified and better prepared workforce for them.
Yeah. So you had mentioned integrating through like code.org and whatnot. I'm wondering what advice you would give to educators who are starting to teach CS and are interested in integrating it into a subject area outside of just CS by itself.
Again, I think there's a whole host of things that you could do. Look at what's happening in the field that you're in right now and talk to somebody who's doing that job and ask them, how is computer science influencing them? You'll get great answers. Invite them in as guest speakers for your students so that you and your students can both hear, and then use that as inspiration for your first project. That's an excellent starting place. An example is I have a colleague that teaches right next door to me. He's a social studies teacher. He invited a data science person who he teaches AP government. And so he invited a political consultant to come in, and that person was in charge of polling and kind of getting a pulse on what people think. And he used data science to be able to analyze, brought in that information, talked to him. And this social studies government teacher was just blown away by the amount of computer science. So then he started to dig into the data. He started to use some tools like gapminder.org, really helped him to be able to get a pulse on like social issues. And once he started playing with gapminder.org, that was sort of the beginning of his journey in helping students to be able to see where patterns might be able to be found in data. Well, that can lead you to making social points that you couldn't have made if it wasn't for that data. And those stories then become a convincing argument to help people to be able to influence positive change. So that's one example. I really think too, friendships can make a huge difference. Small conversations with colleagues that are open and kind. Again, at Conard High, I work with a teacher who's also upstairs. She teaches Spanish, and she was open enough during the hour of code to use the Moana Hour of Code app, and then to teach her children how to do direction in Spanish using that Hour of Code app. She's just a light, so this social studies teacher, again, a light. And students appreciate it so much because they see now that computer science, it's not one course.
Right.
And they know this. They use these tools all the time. It gives them a bit of a power, a bit of a leg up for them to be able to use it as a tool with something that they love, maybe even something that surprised them a little bit. Programming graphing calculators and the high school level for high school mathematics courses can be, a source of light. For younger students, encouraging them to, when they do use an image in a PowerPoint slide, they don't just simply use it, but they also cite it and include proper citations. When a younger child is going online, do not use your last name. They should never use their last names. Again, in terms of just staying secure and safe online. And the teachers model that behavior, that we also cite images that we use in our slide. I think this is a missing please and thank you. Like, we would never, for a kindergarten class, not say to our students, hey, make sure you say please and thank you when you're asking for that. Or is that a proper way to ask for something? Isn't there a word that's missing? And I think the same is true with, computer science and being safe online. Did you just put your last name there? Is that safe? How did you send that email to that teacher? Is that an appropriate way to communicate to them? Is there a period at the end of that sentence? So I do think that it's sort of the missing really large elephant. There's a reason why it's missing. It can be scary for teachers, and it can be scary a bit for students. The whole point of education is to help students to make good choices based on knowledge, not fear. And so if we can model that for them, then we're closer to, I think, helping them to be able to work through, helping our society work through the issues that we might be still having with computer science.
Yeah, I'm curious, what are some potential pitfalls that other educators should look out for when they're trying to do some integration?
that it's okay if you don't know, if you're unsure. I think a lot of teachers, and with good reason, used to being experts in their field, and that's a beautiful thing. There's no way to be an expert in the field, and there's no way to produce a perfect product when you're teaching computer science. It's a constant reinvention. It's a constant learning. Often the students, because they have more time to create and they have more time to learn than we do, we're sort of guiding them and we're helping them and we're learning often right alongside them. And that's okay. That's completely normal. And it can be really, I think, relieving. It takes a lot of pressure off. And it also is really joyful to join your students in the learning process as opposed to being their one source of knowledge.
Yeah, I like to share. So like, I think it was every Thursday in my classes, it was like we'd start with debugging and I would share either a bug that I was personally working on and like, here's how I solved this particular bug I was trying to figure out. Or I would showcase, here's a famous bug in a video game and here's what might have gone wrong with this and how it relates to the projects that you're working on. I think kind of sharing that and just being human and being like, look, I make mistakes too. I'm constantly problem solving just like you. It kind of normalizes it and makes it less scary and hopefully more accepting, because even if you don't want it, you're going to run into bugs.
Agreed.
So you mentioned equity earlier, and I'm wondering what you wish more CS educators understood about equity and inclusivity in CS education.
So my parents, they never learned how to swim. And so when we would go to the beach or we would go to and they learned how to tread water ish, but because they grew up in northern Maine, they didn't really need to swim and they didn't necessarily have access to pools or any place to learn how to swim. And that meant that when we'd go to the beach or we'd go to the water with any of those family members, there was a lot of fear. And I didn't judge them for that because I thought to myself, that's not their fault. They don't know. They've never seen it. If you see an animal, like a dog that is afraid to go up to a balloon because it scares them, you wouldn't sort of get them closer to the balloon in a mean way or, sort of set up a room full of balloons. You would, sort of gently, maybe kindly give them a balloon that's a little deflated. Maybe give them a lot of treats as they get closer and closer to that balloon. That's the only kind way to be able to help an animal. Or when you have somebody that's afraid of swimming, like I said, the right way to handle that is to be sensitive to that. And I think right now for computer science, because people's experiences are so different, if somebody's never studied computer science until they've gone to high school, that they can look at the room of computers and it can be a bit like a room of balloons for that person. And so first, I think in terms of equity, exposure is key, but it needs to be kind and fair exposure that's positive with lots of access points, lots of rooms for students to have success. Because again, I think there's a whole host of reasons why people wouldn't necessarily have experience with computer science. And some of it is just, it's not their fault.
Right.
And so as educators, I think we need to be really, really sensitive to that. And then we need to be also sensitive to the fact that students' reactions to that situation, meaning computer science, might be really different. When some students are really confused, they might act out or they might be disrespectful or they might shy away. They might be really hesitant to respond because of confidence issues. And none of those things mean that they can't do it. It just means that they need different support. They need more sensitivity. They need more access points. They need a different way to be able to see computers. And there's some things that teachers can do to really just even soften the environment. So I think be wary of the way classrooms are decorated. Consider putting things near the computer that sort of soften it up, or even if it seems ridiculous. I have stuffed animals all over my room, and some students they reach into this vat of stuffed animals and they bring them over to the computer and they talk to them if they're having programming difficulties. And it seems so silly, but it's really wonderful. And there's some students that I know they're having a difficulty, and I'll ask them, which stuffed animal would you like? Are you feeling the unicorn? So I'll bring those over and give them something that's different, that's a little softer, a little kinder, to be able to help them to be able to feel good about computer science and to not be intimidated. I think those couple things would probably work at any grade level. And like I said, in terms of curriculum, designing many on-ramps, designing many ways for students to be creative. Students, maybe they're passionate about arts. Give them art projects, different ways that they can be able to create using computer science. Maybe music is their thing. Give them a way to be able to create using music. And it's okay that maybe you don't know yet how to do that, if you have a student who's motivated by athletics or a student that's motivated by the health field, if that's sort of their draw, they will find ways to be able to learn that, and they'll blow you away with what they can do. So I'd recommend trying to find different access points for students and then trying to do what you can to decorate the room. And then finally, be careful about how you recruit for your classes, especially if it's optional in the high school level. If you ask students universally, do you want to take computer science? Often you'll get the overzealous and overconfident students that will say yes. That doesn't necessarily mean they should. Maybe they'd be great at the course. And I mean, I think all students, of course, should take computer science, but, not every computer science course. And then, you'll have some students that really should feel confident, but they don't. So just be really careful about how you recruit. And I think one-on-one conversations with teachers and students, if you say you believe in a student, if you say that they can do it, they will believe you. I have zero doubt.
And how do you recruit kids? If you haven't had them in a class before and you don't really know them, are you going out and speaking to other teachers and like, hey, who do you think would be a great fit for this kind of class? Or what advice would you give?
My colleague in my school and in my system, they're really amazing and supportive that way. So my department head allows me to work with my colleagues to present in their math courses. So in that way, we're speaking to really close to 100% of the population in the school. I bring students because they're much better than I am at explaining what is this computer science thing. Computer science in our school is taught in multiple departments. So that's the other thing. Like, try not to be so weary about which department can or cannot teach it. I think my dream is that all departments eventually will be able to teach computer science. It's probably the right solution. But in the meantime, in our school, we teach it in the technology and the mathematics department. But we advertise, so I'm delivering to all the math courses, but we're advertising all the courses. So, and students are talking about all the courses because to them, it's just computer science. Who cares which department is teaching it? That can really help in terms of recruitment. The word of mouth, students sort of explaining what the courses are. And then from there, we encourage one-on-one conversations with teachers. So each teacher sort of should be meeting one-on-one with students to be able to explain to them what is this computer science thing and also how it would help them to be successful.
A lot of good advice in there. And earlier, when I had asked you about your ideal CS program, if you were to design one, you mentioned recruiting teachers. What kind of advice might you give for how to recruit CS educators?
So you want to choose educators that understand that they're going to always be learning. They're never going to be able to put this curriculum into a box and say, oh, okay, next year I'll do it exactly the same way.
Right.
So you want someone who's got this joy for learning, right? That would never be happy to box their curriculum and put it on a shelf. They would always want to join their students and to be able to learn. I would really recommend, if districts are looking for a resource to figure out what is a great computer science teacher, the CSTA, the Computer Science Teachers Association, just released the really great standards document. You could certainly refer to that document. That would really give you a sense, sort of the equivalent to, they have those same sets of standards for what makes a great math teacher or what makes a great English teacher. They have the equivalent that the Computer Science Teachers Association just created for computer science teachers. That would be a really great starting place.
And that's the ISTE CSTA one where they jointly created it?
Correct. Yep. And it's excellent. It just came out fall 2019.
They're working on creating resources to help PD providers kind of prepare for that. I'm on a team that's helping with that. So it's great how much support there is for they're not just okay, here are the new standards, but they're actively trying to help teachers with these standards and preparing for it. But I agree. I really like the teacher standards for ISTE CSTA.
And then a second resource might be the script rubrics. That one of the aspects that a district should look at is curriculum and teacher training. And each of those are detailed out, so sort of spread out over what's a beginning skill for a district, what's an advanced skill. I'm using the wrong language, but they really just move what does it mean to have a good group of teachers teaching computer science, grades K through 12, from beginning to proficient and then advanced. And so it would really help a district to be able to see what it probably maybe looks like now and then what it could look like from a district perspective. Speaking
of CSTA, and earlier we had mentioned that we're both on boards for our state chapters. I'm curious, what have you learned as a result of your experience in volunteering for organizations like CSTA?
I've learned that as a teacher, that it's really important to do what you can to help other teachers, but to also set boundaries. The other, the second piece that I've learned is to realize that there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and there's not enough people right now that are stepping up and working hard to do it. And if more people would step up, then we would just have a much better product for students and for the future. I know that there are so many amazing computer science teachers, and I know part of the problem is everybody's just keeping their head afloat, right? We're all just doing what we can in our lives to feel like we're getting by, and life is so busy. But if you would be able to spare a moment to be able to help, the Computer Science Teachers Association is a really great organization, and we need help. There's more jobs than we can do, and it would be really amazing if more people would participate actively, take on those leadership roles, help with the website, help with training. I'm certain if you've taught computer science longer than 2 years, you know something that would help other people.
Yeah.
And if you're just starting computer science, then we really need your help too, because we want to maintain that perspective, right? We don't want to lose sight of. So everybody could really contribute so much by becoming an active member. I really hope that more people will.
Yeah, and the questions that like a new CS educator would ask can help refine some of the support that are provided by veteran educators and people who do volunteer.
It's 100% voluntary, right, at the state level. So you go because your heart's in it.
Right.
And I know so many teachers have their heart in it. So bring that to the CSTA. Join us. That would be really great. More people would really, really help us. And it would be more fun too.
Yeah, I agree. And the more perspectives at the table, the better.
I was just going to say, the Connecticut Computer Science Teachers Association, they're very involved. We've done a lot, it's just, I think more people would be great.
So I volunteer at like CSTA and some other organizations, but then I also volunteer like at Habitat for Humanity on the weekend to like help build houses, or at least before the lockdown from COVID and whatnot, we were doing that. But what's interesting is one of the team leaders there is a researcher, and he was saying that volunteerism across the nation has been down in the last few years. So there's not enough people doing it. I don't know if it's just people don't realize that they can do it, or if it's just not enough advocacy from organizations like asking for people to help out. But there's certainly a lot of opportunities that can be done in the world of CS education for volunteering and helping.
And I think some of it is just that teachers are so busy.
Yeah.
I completely understand that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, on that note, like, given the various like demands and pressures of being in education, how do you try and stave off that burnout, and how are you taking care of yourself? Like, we're recording this at the end of March, and things are chaotic at the moment in the US. So what are you doing to kind of like help yourself so that way you can help others?
I got into this computer science thing when my daughter was 3 years old. She's now 11. And I would say that she's my muse. She's the reason why I still firmly believe all students should be able to take computer science. In my mind, I want her to have an experience that was different and better than my experience was with computer science. And that's already to some extent happening for her. But I have this strong feeling that the work is just never done. And so I guess that's where the flame comes from. As far as the balance, I think it's really important every day for you to schedule sanity time for yourself as best as you can.
Yeah.
I think physical activity can make a huge difference in your mental well-being and your mental state. I really try to exercise 3, 4, 5 times a week if I can. That makes a huge difference for me. And I try to take time to do the things that really motivate me and make me happy, like spending time with my family and friends, doing crafts, even if that means I can't do the work that needs to get done for next week or even for tomorrow. It's okay. That work is not going anywhere. I think we've got to take time for ourselves, or like you said, we will burn out. I've also, if it's not required for tomorrow, then it's optional as best as I can. However, I do this thing called touch paper once. So if I see an email, or if I, see a paper, if I can accomplish, I really try to see it, do it, address it, and move on, as opposed to hemming and hawing, as best as I can. You can't always do that, but, like if it's a big report or a big grant, you have to revisit again and again. But if it's something that I can read, process once, that saves time versus reading and processing again and again. Every time you read an email, you have to take more time to process it again. Those are just a couple tips. But, exercise, I think, is one of the most important things. And time with people that you love, time with your family and your friends can really make a difference. Yeah, especially in these times.
Yeah. Yeah, those are really good suggestions. And I also follow a lot of those, especially the idea of just like touching the paper once. It's very helpful. So you're not just constantly going back to the same thing over and over and wasting your mental energy on it. Do you have any questions for myself or to the field at large?
The question I always like to ask people is, was there a teacher? Was there someone that inspired you? What was it about them that you think has shaped who you are in computer science as a computer science teacher now? And
yeah, from my standpoint, I've had a lot of really good educators in my life that I borrow bits and pieces from, like, oh, I really love that this person was great at this, and I'm going to incorporate that in my classroom. But I've also had some really problematic experiences in education where I've seen things done and I go, I'm going to do the exact opposite of that because of X, Y, and Z. So with both ends of the continuum, I'm drawing from them and learning lessons from it and trying to incorporate it into the classroom. But it wasn't necessarily like one person that I'm like, I'm really trying to model everything that they're doing. It's like, oh, I love that this person is fantastic at this, and I didn't try and incorporate that into my class. But much like with the content knowledge, my pedagogy is just like constantly evolving. I'm always learning new things. And so as I meet more educators and like through these interviews and like I go into conferences when they're in person and things like that, like learning from more people, I just borrow bits and pieces from them.
so what are you learning right now?
Right now, I'm learning, like, from a personal level, how to deal more with uncertainty because of, obviously, like March of 2020, things are uncertain in terms of what's the US and the world going to look like a month from now or 6 months from now. Professionally speaking, right now, I'm working on a project for a grant for Wyoming where I'm creating this curriculum that's going to integrate computer science with social studies, specifically the Indian for All standards. So we're working with the Wind River, Northern Arapaho, and Eastern Shoshone tribes, and the projects that I'm creating are going to be related to those tribes, and like the kids on the reservation are going to use them, and then eventually it's going to be disseminated across the state and then across like worldwide. So I'm personally working on how do I find meaningful and interesting ways of connecting social studies standards with computer science standards? And then today I was actually looking at English and language arts standards. So like, how can we make these stories that relate to tribal stories that are going to be then used in some kind of a computer science project that kids would find interesting to them and is culturally relevant and meaningful to them? So like, that's the biggest thing that I'm working on, is that area. What about for you? Was there any educator or are there things that you're personally working on?
I'm learning how to balance right now, like on a personal, I think my whole approach to teaching has changed within 2 weeks, right? So how do I make videos? I know in my mind what should be more important is how my students are learning. However, there's a lot of time spent on how can I help them to get to the classes that I'm offering online? How do I support them if they're not making it there? What does that look like? What can I do? What can I do to, if they're not showing up, how can I help them to want to show up,
Right.
And then also, how can I make videos that aren't completely lame, but and are less than 5 minutes, but that do the job to help them, that they would want to be able to dig in just to learn. Like that's basically, we're asking them to learn, not because of a grade, not because we're going to check a box because they showed up, but because it's just joyful to learn. It's a challenge, I think, because for many of them, that's not been their approach. As far as what I'm learning, I'm returning to knitting. Like, so I knitted quite a lot when I was maybe 8-10 years ago. And so I'm relearning those stitches kind of for fun because I'd like to try to learn how to knit a sweater or something a little bit bigger, but I'm sort of building up to that. In terms of computer science, I am continuing to learn more and more about Python. Languages, they're treasure troves of, you never run out of things to do with them.
Right. There's an interview that I did with Anne Gunn that hasn't released yet, and she talked about how there's a lot of computer science in knitting and in like the stitch work that she does, and how you're basically working through an algorithm and whatnot. It's interesting. I had never thought of it that way. I don't know if you ever looked at your knitting as computer science and like how they intersect in various ways.
Yeah, I have a really big creative side, so it just scratches that itch for me. Yeah. But I suppose, you could totally see it as algorithmic. Problem is, it's a little messier than with a computer. If you drop a stitch in a computer, you can just restart the program. It's a little messier sometimes when it's real yarn.
So before we go, I'm wondering if you could share where people could go to connect with you online and the organizations that you work with.
I have no social media except for LinkedIn. It became a lot of overhead. So LinkedIn's a really good resource. Also, they're welcome to, I think that's probably a really great start. As long as they spell my last name right, that's the hardest part.
And with that, that concludes this week's episode of the CSKA podcast. Just a friendly reminder, I do link to many of the resources that Jackie mentioned in this episode, including Jackie's LinkedIn profile, as well as hundreds of debugging exercises that I've created that you can use in your classroom for free. All of the various courses and ciphers and resources that Jackie mentioned throughout the podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing with a friend who might be interested in reaching these resources and hearing from Jackie, or consider providing a review on whatever platform you listen to this on. Stay tuned next week for another Unpacking Scholarship episode, where I will talk about some potential implications of the latest research in CS education, what it means for your classroom. And then 2 weeks from now, it will be another interview. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you are all staying healthy and are having a wonderful week.